Hey guys, how you going? Hope you're all doing very well. This evening I'm going to be doing my third episode of my Shock to the Past series. These are films from the 60s, 70s and 80s that were shocking to audiences when they were released and how they shape up by today's standards. So tonight we're going to be looking at a horror classic from Italy. This is dubbed in the English language in 1977, directed by the great Dario Argento, and this film is called Suspiria. So when it comes to Dario Argento, we know him as a giallo filmmaker. Now giallos aren't quite horror, they're more a case of murder mystery type of films. So you usually got the same sort of story, but told in a very visual way, where it's combining a good soundtrack and it just creates something very, very creepy. But Suspiria was definitely more of a traditional horror film. So basically this is a movie about a woman. She is going to this school for ballet dancers and she realizes straight away that something's off, that the people around her are going missing, so she wants answers, and in order to prevent herself from being the next person on the missing person list, she has to uncover a terrifying secret that is going to put everyone's life in danger. So yeah, as I said, this is much more of a traditional horror film, and what I like about Dario Argento the most, he does have his shortcomings, but he really does make horror an art form, especially in this film. This movie starts off with one of the most memorable death scenes I have ever seen. It's because it just captures the sheer beauty of it, but also the ugliness. And so I felt on one scale, you've got the beautiful shield, and then as you get closer to this film, behind it, you can sense the evil simmering. And that simmering evil is getting larger and larger, and it makes a very awkward experience. It feels like a fever-pitch nightmare. And that nightmare is done through the very vivid colouring. The colouring does play a massive, very pivotal role. And then you've got it combined with a very haunting soundtrack from Goblin. Now, Goblin was a group that helped Dario Argento in a lot of his films, and you can sense the trust between the two of them because they know when to put it in, especially at the start. And so it gets you into the mood straight away, and the very first poetic death scene gets your attention. It grabs you around the throat and it dares you to actually look behind the next corner. And when a film does that on a visual basis, this is something that I haven't really been exposed to. So this is something I really love about Dario Argento, is that he manages to paint a picture. This poetry in motion is that it's combining brutality with beauty, and that's what gives you that false sense of security. Is that a lot of these other films, they paint violence in a very, very nasty way, but it's got an unnatural quality to his films that make it that surreal nightmare. It makes it the other dimension that this film has taken place in. And so that's something I really applaud this director, is that he's made horror into an art form, and that's why I believe that Suspiria, although it has its shortcomings, is a very important film as far as artistic horror is concerned. So the violence, by today's standards, it's not as hard-hitting. I think this movie hasn't aged all that well. It's because when it first came out, I guarantee that this movie would have shocked audiences to no end. It's very graphic, but there is a certain unnatural quality to those death scenes that I thought kind of elevate it from being as disturbing as it really could have been. And whether or not that's a bad thing, that's up to the viewer. But as I said, the stylish sort of approach this film has, it actually warranted this movie to be regarded as one of the most beautiful horror films ever made. I'll go as far to say this is one of the most beautiful films made in general. It's because the use of colouring and the use of that soundtrack just gets you into a mood that is reminiscent of a dream. This is the closest thing to a nightmare that you'd probably have, and that's something I really appreciated about Dario Argento's Suspiria. So the end of the film was actually quite eye-opening, and I thought there were some moments there that were very, very out of this world, very insane experience. But as I said, it's that sense of false sense of security that you're getting into a film that is very stylish, very polished, but that got that sinister heart behind that polished screen that I felt is that it's slowly creeping up in you, and it's engulfing the viewer to the point where the world is getting smaller and smaller. Unfortunately, however, this movie goes for 92 minutes, and this is ultimately the film's biggest problem, is that if it went for 30 minutes, this would have been a great film, is that it's all banking on its visuals, and after a while you start to notice it doesn't really have a personality. It's like striking up a conversation with a beautiful woman, and eventually you're going to get tired of just looking at her. You want to know a little bit about her personality, and if she can't articulate herself very well, and she's not very articulate, it's going to become a bit of a boring conversation. And that's how I felt with Suspiria, is that this was a little bit of a boring conversation, in that it didn't do a good job at actually explaining itself. It didn't do a good job at actually giving you that personality to keep the ball floating. And so the movie does feel like it's missing something, and the further it goes, the more evident that becomes. And so I couldn't connect myself to the characters because of the awful English dubbing, and this is something that is very problematic as far as Dario Argento's other films are concerned. You just can't connect to their plight because there's a strong unnatural quality in the actual dub, and that does match the unnatural quality in the overall atmosphere, But I just thought to myself, if this could have actually connected me on a personal level, it would have made the film terrifying. This movie is very uneasy, it's very creepy, but I never really felt scared because there were moments that I felt were a little bit cheap, and there are very extravagant plot developments that I thought were very convenient, and I just didn't really get into it. And after a while, I was looking at my watch, wondering how long it had to go, because it actually became a little bit irritating in parts as well. And that was down to the fact that the soundtrack from Goblin was used over and over and over and over. And so I started to think, okay, on one hand, this is a director who really knows what he's doing, but on the other hand, there were moments where I didn't really know if he knew what he was doing. So it's kind of a contradiction, and I'm in two minds about Dario Argento. On a visual basis, he's an absolute master. He's an absolute master of his art. But on the other base, as far as stories and as far as the things that you can't see, as far as that's concerned, it's lacking. And therefore, basically, this is a movie that is a treat for the eyes, but it's not really leaving up much for the brain. So it's definitely a 50-50 experience. I can appreciate it and say that it's very important because, you know, directors are making, you know, the directors like Dario Argento are able to make horror an art form and associating horror with things that you wouldn't normally do as far as beauty is concerned. But yeah, it's just lacking that one thing that I thought would have made it an absolute masterpiece that a lot of people consider it to be. So each to their own. If you are a fan of Dario Argento and as Suspiria in particular, please leave your comments in the section below. You know, each to their own. That's the beauty of film. It's subject to opinion, but for me, I just thought, yeah, it's a treat for the eyes, but not much left over for the brain. Alright guys, that's it for my episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Till the next episode, keep watching movies and I'll see you later. Bye.